Welcome to the History Hotline, a direct line to a better understanding of all things Black history and beyond. History Hotline. Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the History Hotline. My name is Deanna Lynn Cook and today's episode has a very special guest that I interviewed a few months back actually, but I held the episode to bring it to you in this kind of Windrush commemorative period that although I have my issues with, I still think it's a really important time to think about that migration post-war of people coming to this country and what it means for society today and what it has done to shape British society today. But first, I've got to shout out the live show. Tickets are on sale for the History Hotline's first ever live show on the 15th of September at 2 p.m. in London. And I just wanted to make sure you are aware of it. If you haven't been listening to the past few episodes, you might not know about it, but the ticket links will be on our social media platforms as well as in the show notes for this episode. Do not let the tickets sell out on you. Please get them before they do sell out. And I cannot wait to see you all there in September. So without further ado, let's roll the tapes to my interview with the wonderful author Kandace Chimbiri. I'm here and joined by a very special guest. This has been an episode that has been a long time coming for sure. I'm so excited to have you here, Kandace. Welcome to the History Hotline. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you very much for having me, Deanna.
Candace, I met at a Windrush 75 event last year, June. So if you're listening to this 2023 June, and I had already come across her books and it was so excited to see her in the flesh and meet her and then hear her present on her kind of writing and the things she has published and her work so far. And it was really great to hear that because I think it's always the case that we know how people are like producing things and writing about things, but actually listening to how they got there, you know, the why essentially, was really, really exciting to me and very interesting. So I really felt like I had to invite her here to talk. First, I wanted the audience to get to know you a little bit better. We have a tradition over here that we do some quick fire questions, Kandace. So the first question I have for you is, well, what are you currently reading?
Well, I'm currently reading a lovely little book called The Other Windrush,
Ooh.
Legacies of Indenture in Britain's Caribbean Empire. And although it does sound like quite a heavy topic, and it is written in a really accessible way. It's a paperback book. It's just over 100 pages, maybe about 150 pages. And it's written in the form of, it's based on oral interviews. So the author just spoke to people who had come over from the Caribbean who were part of the Asian community as opposed to the African descended community. And she spoke to them about, you know, how they felt about things, their experiences. And it's a wonderful book, and the style of it is really, really good. And just hearing these different experiences and how some of them were very similar to the experiences of Caribbean people who came over from the Caribbean who were of African descent, and the way that, you know, people interact with each other because they all had that Caribbean background, but also some of the differences and some of the experiences that they had. And it's just a lovely little read. I mean, I've just started it, but I've had it for a while, but I hadn't had the time to read it because I'd been so busy last year. As you said, like when we met at that Windrush 75 conference, and it was all about Windrush 75 last year. So I had this book for a while before all of that, and I really wanted to read it. So I've just started it now, and it's a lovely read, really.
Brilliant. Who wrote that, sorry?
Well, I was hoping you wouldn't ask me that because I wasn't sure if I'd pronounce the surname correctly, and I didn't want to embarrass myself, but I'm going to try. It's Maria Del, and I think the correct pronunciation is Pilar Kaladeen.
Okay, nice.
Yeah, Kaladeen.
Okay,
She's of, you know, Caribbean Asian descent.
Yeah, wow. That sounds really interesting. I like that, definitely. I've heard the title. I've never actually picked up the book, but I'll be adding that to my list.
Yeah, definitely. The idea of a minority within a minority is the
Yeah,
sort of concept of
especially
it.
yeah, when we think about Caribbean societies being already, pre their migration to Britain, a site of such mass migrations in and out from different places. Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely.
I mean, my thing, as you said at the beginning with the introduction, my thing is about Black history. And obviously, I'm of African descent, and that's what I want to write about. That's a neglected history. But I
Yeah.
think it's important to recognize that just because one history is neglected doesn't mean others aren't as well. And it
Mm,
doesn't have to be like a zero sum game. It shouldn't be.
yeah,
So, yeah. So it's a really, really interesting read and quite interesting things and learning things as well all the time.
of course. Yeah, power of reading, absolutely. What is your favorite book? It's always a tough one.
It is, but my favorite book is The Handmaid's Tale.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, by Margaret Atwood. I read that in 2019. I was in Ghana in
Mhm.
2019 and I thought, oh, I've heard a lot about this. I think I'd seen advertised a TV series, but I don't really get to watch a lot of TV. And I think I might have bought it at the airport. And I don't know, I was just there in Ghana. I was relaxing one day
Yeah,
and I just was reading this book and just reading it, and I just really love it. I can see why it was so popular. Yeah,
nice.
that's my favorite book. That might change in the future,
Yep,
but
of
at the moment,
course.
that's my favorite book.
Oh wow, another one I haven't read. I think we had it at school. I think it was going round, like a lot of my friends were reading it, but I never ever picked it up. But then I've seen the show and I've been like, I need to now read the book. But yeah, I
Yeah,
need to.
there was one thing I was quite disappointed. I started to watch the show, but I don't get a lot
Mm,
of time to watch TV, and I think it's a really good show from what the,
yeah.
the bits I watch. But one thing I was a bit disappointed about the way they handled race in it compared to how it
Mm,
was in the book, because in the
okay.
book the I don't remember what the organization is called, but the people that sort of take over what was once the US,
Yeah.
they're actually quite white supremacists. And I
Mm,
didn't feel that they dealt with that in the book. I mean, maybe now, if they did that now in a post 2020 world, they
right.
might
Yeah.
handle it a bit differently. I mean, not taken away from the show or anything like that,
No, of
but
course.
I just felt like, oh, they didn't really deal with
Yeah.
that in the way that I felt it was in the book. That was my opinion.
Yeah.
People probably hate me for saying that and disagree, but
No,
that was my
definitely.
takeaway from it.
You're entitled to that, absolutely. Especially when you read the book and you have expectations of kind of well how things will be dealt with or how things will kind of look or what characters might be like and then they don't live up to that. That's why like I really hate watching films or TV shows after reading a book. It just never doesn't really tend to go well. The only time that's gone well for me is If Beale Street Could Talk, the book by James Baldwin, and then the film.
Oh,
That was so
yeah.
perfectly done.
Oh, I have to read the book. I've seen the film, but I didn't read the
Yeah.
book. Oh.
The books, that's my favorite book. That's incredible.
Oh,
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so historically, what would you say is your favorite time period?
gosh. Now that is so hard because
Is it?
I think because I write about so many different time periods. I mean,
Yes.
my most recent books have been about Black British history because that's what people sort of want. But
Mm.
my earlier books were actually about ancient history, and I also love a lot of medieval history as well.
Oh, wow.
So it's really, really hard. But I think if I had to choose one period that I would say perhaps for me is a little bit more of the one that I would probably admire or be into a bit more than any other. I would say it was ancient for sure,
Okay.
because I quite like ancient history. And I would think it would probably be the Second Kingdom of Kush.
Mm.
And the exact dates, I think, were maybe around 600 BC to about 350 AD. So it was quite a long civilization.
Yeah.
Some people put it earlier. Some people started from 860 BC to about
Oh, wow.
350 AD, so a really long period of history. But I
Yeah.
would say that's my favorite
Mm.
civilization.
Okay. I know nothing about ancient civilizations. My knowledge of that is poor, absolutely terrible. But maybe one day. Do you have a favorite historical figure?
It's again, it's kind of similar, right? Because I think there are so many different people in history that are fascinating, and it's really, really hard to pick one. But if I had to, I would say probably two, and they're not ones that I really know a lot about in terms of their personality. We
Mm.
don't really know much about them, like maybe what they thought or there's because they're ancient and there's not been a
Yeah.
lot about them. But I would say there would it would probably be between two, again from that same period, the Second Kingdom of Kush. One is Pharaoh Taharko,
Okay.
who came from the Sudan. He ruled both the part of Sudan and Egypt as well. So he had a huge empire, and it probably even went out of Africa as well. Some people said it went as far as Spain.
Wow.
He's one of the greatest rulers, really, in history, and a lot of people don't
Mm.
know about him, but there are
No.
actually statues of him and things like that, even in the UK. You can see
Wow.
them at museums. There are things that he left behind. There's a column at Karnak in Egypt, which he built. There's so many things about him. He's
Yeah.
even mentioned in the Old Testament, in the old Hebrew writings, and in the whole Christian
Wow.
Old Testament. But again, a lot of people don't really know, I think, enough about him or his name. And
Mm.
then from the same civilization, someone who ruled later was a woman called Queen Amani Reines.
Okay.
And she actually fought against the Romans. And there are artifacts around, including some in the British Museum related to
Mm.
this figure. And these are like two Black History figures. And yeah, I just was really fascinated with them and their achievements, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, even though I didn't know a lot about their personalities as such, but their achievements and the things they've left behind and the things they've done and their impact on history, it's
Mm.
still, it's still something we can look at today.
Yeah, absolutely. I would not even, as I said, think to know. But it is, I think, also an important point about understanding African history prior to this point of colonization, or European colonization that we see in the 17th, 18th century, looking well before this time, is really, really important. And as you said, some of your early works definitely do that, which is really, really nice to kind of shout out and highlight those two figures. So Pharaoh Sudakan and Queen Amani Reines.
Pharaoh Taharko, yes,
Tahaka. Oh, I
yeah,
can't
and
remember.
Queen Amani Reines.
Nice,
And
brilliant.
Amani is the Kushite way of saying Amen. So they
Ah,
had similar gods to ancient Egypt. They had some of their own, and they had other similar ones. So just as some of the Egyptian pharaohs had Amen in their names, so like
mm,
Amenhotep and so on.
yeah.
These ones they would have Amani, so Amani
Wow.
Reina, Amani
Yeah.
Tori, and so on.
Wow.
So yeah, it's
That's
something that
awesome.
we really, really, really should know a lot more. And I think one of the things for me with the ancient history and why I think these are the figures that slightly stand out a bit more is because even though enslavement is really, really important, I mean,
Mm,
I'm Barbadian, right? So it's a huge part of what we would learn at school and it's a huge thing we need to know and it's really impactful on explaining to children how the world is today. But I've always said from the beginning, well, not always, but from the time I started getting into doing my books, that I feel it's really important not to start Black history, especially for children, with enslavement. It's really important to start it earlier and with some of these kind of histories, and then you can explain more recent history because is this older history as well.
absolutely, definitely. And I think you raise an important point there with the way that children learn history. And obviously, with being a children's author, you're very obviously aware of this, and how children see themselves, especially Black children, how they see themselves. If that is only, enslaved and shackled, what that does to them, what that does to their perception of self and things moving forwards as they grow older and step into the world. I think it is really important, definitely. And a lot of people actually on this podcast ask me if I would ever do more ancient history or anything like that. And I am not the expert to say. I'll need to get the relevant guests. I feel like we have one here today.
Well, you say that, but don't forget, I mean, you are, a trained scholar. I'm not. I only went to school up to high school. I didn't even finish university. Tried it,
Yeah.
it wasn't for me. I didn't finish it. But, in the beginning, before I started doing this, I wasn't as confident as I am
Mm.
now. I really wasn't. And
Yeah.
I had to sort of have conversations with myself about, well, who do you think you are? Why do you think you could do these histories and write these books if no one else has been doing it? And then
Mm.
I just realized that, maybe instead of trying to approach it as an expert, maybe I could just approach it in terms of, well, this is what I have researched, talk to experts because that information is there, and
Yeah.
find out what I can do rather than focusing on maybe what I can't do. And that's why I decide to do it in the way I do it. And, there are a lot of things that I really don't know, but I try to make sure that at least what I do say has been properly researched and I can
Mm.
actually explain it. But I don't try to explain and to do everything. And so, you never know. I think it would be great. And even as well, what you were saying about the importance of it for how Black children see themselves, but it isn't even just Black children, it's also how
Mm.
other children will see them too. Because if you
Yeah.
have a Black History Month and you're teaching, and the only things you have to teach are about enslavement, yes, that has the effect on the Black children. But what
Mm.
about all the other children in the class who are from all other backgrounds and they can all find things from their ancient history and say, well,
Yeah, true.
there was, and so I just felt it was something so important that even though I was at the beginning, especially not sure I could do it, I just thought it's too important not to try. So that's how I just sort of started to get into all these histories.
Brilliant. No, it makes perfect sense. Absolutely. So, so important. Is there a historical figure then, maybe within this same vein of ancient history, that you feel more people should know about, or society, everyone, let's say everyone in society should know about? Is there a person you think, wow, look at the way they've shaped the world?
Gosh, just one. I think maybe I'd say Pharaoh Taharko. I think I'd
Okay.
still say, yeah, I think I'd say
Yeah.
Pharaoh Taharko because his achievements, it's ancient Egypt, which a lot of people need to know about and like knowing about, and the fact that you can actually go and see things that he built, and there's so much evidence about him still left, even though it might not be his personality and his character, but in terms of his achievements, I think that could be a really good start.
Yeah, I definitely agree. From what I have learnt today, is there, following on with that line of questioning, a historical event that you think more people in society should know about?
I couldn't think really about one particular event. And I think that's probably why, even with the books that I do, I write, ancient, and I've got a bit of medieval and a bit of
Mm,
modern. I don't think I would choose just one event. I think I would just sort of say, I think with the past, we always are learning about things. And sometimes things don't seem eventful or important to events don't seem important to us in our time, but then they're more important to people in the future. Because if you think about it, if Britain in more recent times didn't have an empire that, ruled over, what was it, about a quarter of the world, or a quarter of the world's population, or a
yeah,
quarter of the
yeah.
world, or whatever, you wouldn't
Mm,
really pay much attention to some of the things that happened in British history back in ancient times. You
mm,
wouldn't really. It
true.
wasn't
Yeah.
that significant in ancient times, right? History was really all about the Middle East in ancient times. But it's become important because, Britain colonized so many places. So then understanding Britain and the Britain legal system and British language, English language, and things like that became important. So I kind of feel when I think about history, I don't really think about it in terms of, well, this is an important event and everyone should know about it, as much as I think, what will children need to know about in the future as an important
Mm,
event? So, for example, when I did the Windrush book back in 2018, because it was originally a self published book, and I did it in 2018, and at that
yeah.
time I hadn't seen any other children's books about the Windrush.
Yeah.
I later found out there was one, but that was the only one as far as I'm aware, and it wasn't really such a significant event. It's really changed a lot in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
But at the time, I was thinking, I came here, I was born in the UK, born in London, but I had my secondary education in Barbados. I was living in, having re immigrated back to the UK or
Yeah.
whatever. I was sort of thinking, why don't people know a lot more about that history? So that's, how I started to think about writing that book. And then obviously it was the 70th anniversary of the Windrush and nobody was really saying much about it. And I thought, oh, I'll do this book because I think I was sort of thinking more into the future, that was an
Mm,
event that happened that
yeah.
everyone should have known about. And now they are. So it's kind
Mm,
of, catching up. So I kind of feel there isn't ever going to be for me one event. I think I'm always going to be the sort of person who feels that there's so much that we need to recover in histories. There's so much we've
Yeah.
already lost, so much has been neglected or just hidden or distorted. And I think I'm always going to be looking at all different peoples and all different events and thinking, oh, we need to know that, we need to know that. I don't think for me there is one thing. It's not like I'm someone who studied one particular era and has a deep, deep knowledge of it. I think
Yeah.
my knowledge is more broad and my interests are really, really broad, but I am always thinking about children and the future and how much more can we teach them and let them know in an increasingly diverse, interconnected world, and where they're going to need to know a lot more,
Yeah, absolutely. No, definitely. That makes sense. It is definitely the case, especially with, I think, something like the arrival of the Windrush ship, which is kind of symbolically representing like a bigger and a longer migration. It's for me, it's been fascinating because I graduated in 2018 from university, and I wasn't doing any kind of Black British history at that point. I was studying the Caribbean academically, and then the Windrush scandal started unfolding, or the Home Office scandal, as I'm trying to refer to it as now. As it unfolded, people then were kind of, well, who are these people? Who are these people affected? Why did they come here? Why do they have the right to stay? Obviously, in the line of questioning as to why they were then faced with these illegal deportations. But it was so late on, I guess, in my kind of academic journey that this story pops up. But if it hadn't been for those people that were kind of writing on it and writing on these post-war migrations prior to it being quote unquote popular or trendy, the text kind of wouldn't be there ready for when the moment popped, essentially, and the kind of push was like, well, what was Windrush? Da, da, da. It's strange now to me in 2024 where we are with the Windrush narrative. I think in some ways it's, I'm going to say damaging, but I think it's a little bit oversimplified
Hmm.
in the sense and the way it's being commercialized. I mean, we could talk about the
Yes.
overground line.
I just heard about that. Yeah, I just heard. I mean, that's the whole thing. And then I mean, I haven't been on Instagram for about 6 months, but I
I love
was
that for
posting
you.
a bit about it, and the reaction to things like the stamps and the coins as well
Yeah.
last year, very, very mixed. And you could see some people thought it was a good thing, but other
Mm,
people didn't and don't. And even with the Windrush line, I did see some people saying, well, this is all very well and good, but when are you going to give the
yeah.
people that are due compensate?
Mm.
There's still a lot of things coming up about it.
Yeah, absolutely. But very interesting that it's all kind of, I guess as a historian, like I like looking at the way people remember history, and as time passes on, how we remember these things and how we think about this migration in 10 years, 20 years, 50 years time. And as you said, how will children learn about these things? How will they remember them? How will those moments or events be memorable or written down for them, which obviously you're um having a hand in through your text. My final question in our quick fire round is, what book do you think everyone should read at least once in their lives? And you can pick your own book, because I feel like, why not?
One of my own. Gosh, I don't know. I haven't really thought about. I guess again, because I'm someone that's got such broad interest in different broad part, in history, a broad swathe of history.
Yep.
It'd be so hard for me to pick one book. If I had to pick, let's say, one of my own, as you said, I think it would be a toss up between. I think if I had to, I think I'd say The Story of Afro Hair,
Nice.
5,000 Years of History, Fashion and Styles, simply because that one is covering a wide range of historic periods. You've got some ancient, medieval, and modern history in there. So I think I'd probably pick that one.
Brilliant. Nice, nice. I love that. So thinking about your writing, and how you got into writing children's books. You mentioned a little bit earlier that you were born and raised in London, and then went to Barbados in your teen years for secondary
Yeah,
school.
when I was about 10, so I had all my
Yeah,
primary school education in the UK and then all my secondary school education in Barbados.
brilliant. And then would you say, or was it that experience of migration, or your childhood, that influenced your decision to start writing books?
I don't know. I mean, when I was young, I liked books. Both my sister and I, we loved books. My mum would always buy us books, and my dad was always reading as well. And they really, really encouraged that. So I always liked books and reading. But I don't think I ever thought about being a writer. When I hear other writers talking, they always were writing from the time they were like 6 years old. And, you read on their, you see interviews and they said, yes, I wrote my first story when I was 4. And, I wrote before I could write. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, I feel such a fake because I never
Yeah.
did those things. But I did like books and I liked reading. When I was in secondary school, and that was obviously in Barbados, and that's when we did learn. When I do remember for the first time becoming interested in history, and I remember sitting in the class and the teacher was talking about the Haitian Revolution, and I
Mm,
just remember feeling so. I can't really explain, but I always remember that feeling. I think
yeah.
that's when I really first started to get really, really into history. Even though I liked it at school and it was really important, we obviously learned all about enslavement and the way that people resisted and things like that. But obviously, it's not a nice story. But I
Yeah.
remember the Haitian Revolution that really, really got me into history. And then, but I didn't study history after that. But I just always had the interest. So when I came to the UK and I just saw, wow, they've got all these museums and they're free and they've got all this stuff in the museums from all over the world
Yeah.
and all these artifacts and all this
Mm,
history that's there, some of
yep.
it gathering dust, some of it
Mm,
just stuck in cases. And I just kind of started to, follow it, but more from just of interest.
yeah.
But still, I didn't think about writing. The only time I really started to think about doing these books was I remember going to some talks with a couple of people who were doing Black history at the time. I remember going to some talks with an organization called Black History Walks. Tony Warner, he put on some talks, and I also heard some talks by Robin Walker as
Yeah.
well. Who the Black History Man they call him. And I remember just thinking, this history really needs to be out there a lot more, and it really needs to be out there a bit more for children. I remember sort of having conversations with them about it as well, and then being really encouraging.
Mm,
And then, yeah, I just thought, well, I've been learning all these things, I'm still learning, and I like it. Maybe I should do the writing. And that's how I started. I started as a self published author, just started to do children's books. No one else was really doing them at the time as
yeah.
far as I knew. And yeah, that's it. So it wasn't something that I could really say I thought about from childhood, but maybe some of the seeds were there that I was
Mm.
then able to pull together later.
Yeah, absolutely. I wondered if your desire to, like, obviously write about history, and you've said that interest in history was there, but then what made you kind of connect the writing for children? You could have written for adults, you could have written for anybody else. Yeah, how did the two elements, the history and then the writing for children, kind of come together?
That is such a good question. I honestly don't know. I mean, I don't have children myself, but
Yeah.
I do have godchildren and, around this time as well. So perhaps it was thinking about my godchildren as well, and maybe friends' children, and maybe just also coming from Barbados, but being Black British as well, right? So I
Yeah.
am, I don't always say I'm Black British. Usually, if people say, I just say, oh, I'm British born, but I'm Barbadian parentage. But, because I actually lived in Barbados as well, right? So
Yeah.
I had my secondary school education here. I've got friends here and everything. But I think we all, my way, I think we all have a responsibility to our society, and why I feel very passionate about Britain as well as about Barbados and the world the wider world.
Yeah.
And I think, when I would go in bookshops and just sort of see what a poor selection of books they had for
Mm.
children about Black history.
Yeah.
And if they did have it, it was just always about enslavement
Yeah.
or civil rights. And
Mm-hmm.
I just felt that wasn't right. And so somehow in my mind, I just thought, I'm going to do books, but I want them to be books for children, even if adults read them as well.
Of
But I
course.
really felt it was important to do that for children. I wasn't really seeing people doing very much of it at the time at all.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I don't really know exactly how it came together, but that was the kind of feeling I was having at the time.
It is. I think you're right with saying that as I guess people within society, we have a responsibility, and I think that was a really important point you made in terms of like pulling the two together. Um, how do you decide what to write on? I've noticed that your titles, you've got ancient history, as you said, you've got medieval, you've got 20th century postal migration, you have hair and culture and art and things like that. Yeah, how do you decide? Do you have, is it like a process to it, a method? I don't know. Or is it just what takes your fancy?
It's just what takes my fancy. I
Nice.
wish I could say I had a method. I wish I could say, there was some like overall great pattern or something. But honestly, Diana, it's just things that just take my fancy. But I think that's one of the things about being a writer, not just a history writer, I think any writer.
Yeah.
There's never a shortage of ideas. I think a lot of people are very afraid. They think, oh, writing, the ideas is some mystery thing. But ideas are actually one of the easiest things to get because you're always taking things in. You're seeing people, you're going around, you're looking at books, you're seeing other books. There's probably everything you've read that you've probably thought, well, maybe not everything, but a lot of things
Yeah.
you read, you think, oh, I really like that, but I wish that had happened, or why didn't they do that? And like you were saying earlier about when you read a book and then you go and you see the film and you're disappointed,
Mm.
usually because the film isn't quite how you imagined it.
Yep.
And you're not the only one who feels that way. There's probably like, if there's 50 people, they've probably seen it in 50 different ways. So ideas are not something that I think we'll ever be short of. And I don't feel, so I try to just be attuned to when the ideas come.
Yeah.
So they will just, and they do come. So the ideas isn't so much a difficult thing. And I think in many ways, being a children's Black history author, the ideas are actually one of the easier things because there's so many things that people have just ignored or not written about that there's no shortage of topics at
Yeah.
all. I
Yeah.
think it's just whether you can actually get them done.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I completely agree with that. I think you're completely right. Whatever you kind of read and take in, there's like another million ways you could probably think through and do something in response to or in line with something you've read or taken in or listened to. I wondered kind of in your publishing journey so far, have you faced challenges and not necessarily how you've overcome them, but like what have those been and what has it been like working through them?
Yeah, definitely. There are definitely challenges. I mean, as you said, the Windrush book. So that was actually my fourth self-published book. I had published four books myself, self-published them before I got a book deal, which is where I'm at now. That I write books for publishers. I've got an agent, but I wasn't like that for most of my writing journey. And I think the first thing, as I mentioned before, is the confidence, the belief that what you're doing is important enough and you've got to try and do it. So that was the first thing when I was self-publishing. And then it was difficult, learning the process of self-publishing. I think it's easier now because you can do things like, which I don't know a lot about, but you can do things like publish books on demand. And I think the whole process of self-publishing has become a lot easier than when I did it back in, 2008 or so. So there are those issues. And then also, if you're self publishing, you're responsible for doing your own marketing, your own distribution. And that was really hard because I'm not really a salesperson and I'm not really wanting to do those kind of things. and you've got to do that. So that was very, very challenging. Now that I'm traditionally published, it's a lot easier because I haven't got to do those things anymore. I am happy that I got the self-publishing deal, but there is a part of me that, makes me feel sad that it did come in 2020 as a result of George Floyd, the Windrush scandal, and obviously the protests, the anti-racism protests. So I kind of feel like, why did it take three negative things for people to suddenly wake up to the need for these type of books? That's really how it did come about. People did realise there is, and we need to, bring out more books that are dealing with some of this. And the story of the Windrush was already done. It was a self-published book. I'd been self-distributing it for 2 years, and the demand did go up for it in 2020. And so it was very much that book that led me to getting the book deal and becoming traditionally published. So but if I hadn't kept at it and I hadn't, then I wouldn't have got that. So I guess it's partly having that belief in yourself, the importance of what you're doing, wanting to make a contribution, but also feedback from people. So even though I was self-publishing, I would still sometimes get the chance to meet people who had read the book, or I might see a review and getting that positive feedback from people, just saying, not necessarily a lot of people, but just saying, that book really helped me, or, someone read that book and they were really touched by it, or something like that. That also keeps you going as well, gives you that motivation.
Absolutely, I can imagine that being kind of the spur that kind of pushes you forwards, especially knowing that there is or was, and still not enough, so little out there in regards to showcasing these histories in a format for children. And I wondered, your children are your main audience. How cool is it to kind of get feedback from them and, like, I guess, see and know the way that your books are shaping their understanding and the way they see history?
I know, right? Well, the children, I mean, one of the things I like now is that I do actually get to meet more children because now I'm a full-time author. So obviously part of the journey I've now been able to transition and to become a full-time author, and I get to meet children a lot more than I did before, where I was doing this but still working in a day job. And obviously last year I went around, I was talking to them about the Windrush book, and they look at me really eagerly and they say, Miss, did you come on the Windrush 75 years ago?
No way.
And I'm like, I'm so sorry to disappoint you. I'm just writing about it, but here we go.
Oh gosh. I can imagine their
Oh
understanding
yeah,
of time.
I always get that one.
It's just
But it's good, right? They're
yeah,
enthusiastic about it. And even though I have to
absolutely.
disappoint them, well, no, I wasn't actually one of the passengers on the ship, but
Yeah.
let's move on.
Absolutely. Forgive me because I don't really work with children, especially at that age, so often, but do they come with like suggestions and requests and are they like adults in that sense of, oh, why don't you write about that or that?
All the time. They are full of suggestions. Funny enough, one thing that I've noticed quite a lot of children have said to me, and I've thought, wonder why. A lot of them say, Miss, would you write some books for adults? I don't know what they're trying to tell me, but they say that quite a lot. I get that one quite a lot as well.
Maybe they think their parents need your books as well, or the adults in their life. They've found your niche that you haven't hit.
I have no idea. I must ask in the future actually why they say that. But yeah, but it is really good. And what I like as well, because one of the things about my books, I say to myself, whatever I'm going to write for children, the book has to be read by all children. I don't write thinking, well, no matter what your background is, that book is written, and you should be able to read it, and everyone should be able to read the same book. And it's good because I think it's good because I'm happy with the response, because when I talk to children and they've read the book or they're reading the book or they're doing it, they are very concerned about the future and social things, and they will ask questions a bit. And sometimes, with the Windrush book, it will bring up questions about racism, and sometimes they will ask me, what were your experiences like? What were your parents' experiences like? Do you think it's better now? I get that question quite a lot because they're very concerned, and this will be children of all backgrounds asking that question. So that's really nice, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just shows as well, like, these, we know this, obviously, children aren't born with like prejudice or hate. And they are just as concerned being in British society, probably the things they're seeing on the news, maybe the things they hear their parents talk about and the adults in their life. And, your book is importantly actually not just a history lesson for them but a vehicle for those conversations, for them to be able to get into conversations about racism in an age appropriate way, because they're doing it through a historical sense and educational sense. So yeah, it is definitely really really important. I did want to ask you, and maybe I'm asking for myself, in regards to process, but when you kind of think up an idea, or you're about to start a book or the research for a book, which I'm sure takes time, what is your process? Do you have one? Like, how does it kind of work? How do you go about writing a book? It seems like such a huge task. Yeah, I kind of wondered how you do it.
I think it varies from book to book and topic to topic and the type of book that I'm writing. But I have a friend who asks me this question quite often. And I think they've asked me that every time I've done a book. What was your process? And I think to myself, would you just stop asking me that question? You should know by now that my process is no process. I, I it's so chaotic and messy, and I'm not actually a chaotic or messy person outside of writing. I actually like things quite organized, and I like to know what I'm doing. And I really try to do that with the writing. I will sit down and I think, right, Deanna, I've got this idea for the book. I'm going to write this book, and I write the title, and then I'll think, right, this is how I'm going to do it. I'm going to do the research first, and then I'm going to outline, then I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do that. And I do start with the best intentions. And Deanna, it never, ever, ever goes that way. It starts off a bit of research, then a bit of writing, and then I've got to do a bit more research, and then I've got to do this, and then I've got to do that. And I honestly sometimes look back and just think, I don't even know how I quite did it, because it just has been a whole mess, and it just seems to come together. But I keep striving. Every time I'm writing a book, I'm always striving to think I'm going to do the research first, then I'm going to write it.
Yeah, I guess you've kind of articulated your process though. Even though you might feel like you don't have one, you kind of have one by being able to say that you don't have one. I feel like that has hurt my head more than it needed to. But yeah, I guess as well the way that research also informs writing, and then writing informs the research you need to keep doing. There's kind of a cyclical element to it, so I wouldn't stress about it. I would just, yeah, that your process is exactly that, a little bit of writing and a little bit of research. I wondered, it might be like picking your favorite child, but do you have a favorite of your books? And I ask that knowing that they are all, spanning a variety of different topics and periods. So it might be a difficult question. Sorry.
Yeah, they are really. So you're right, it's hard to choose. I mean, one of the things when we're talking about what children ask, they do often ask me, which is your favorite book? And I do tell them honestly, I don't actually have a favorite book, and I really don't. All my books are, they're a little bit different, and they also, because I've been very lucky in that I'm not really told what to write. I kind of have so much freedom to write what I feel I need to write at the time. So I don't actually have a favorite. But in terms of research, as you've asked, I think if I did have to pick one, I would probably say the story of Afro hair, simply because that is covering thousands of years of history. So I obviously had to do quite a lot of research so there was a lot of research involved, which meant I was learning a lot of things. I was surprised when I wrote that book, and I suppose it also ties to what we were just saying about process as well, because that book, I had the idea for that book since 2013, because in 2013 I had worked as part of a community group a community committee they put together at the Fitzwilliam Museum on an exhibition they were doing called Origins of the Afrocomb. 6,000 years of art and culture, and it was a temporary exhibition, about 4 months, between the Fitzwilliam Museum and the museum around the corner. I think it's called the Museum of Anthropology and Archaeology. I think that's the name. I might have got the name wrong. And they did a joint. They brought out their African combs, different combs that they had from ancient Egypt right through medieval times, and they put on this really good exhibition, Origins of the Afrocomb, and it was looking at African combs as an object and some of the history around it. And because of my previous self-published books, they had asked me to do a book called Secrets of the Afrocomb, and they gave me basically access to the museum artifacts, to photos, and to the research and the things they were putting together. And I, crafted a children's book around that. And the book was really well received. And I remember at the time thinking it was a really good exhibition. I really enjoyed it. And I think it was really good looking at African combs. But I remember at the time thinking it would be good to actually look at a bit more at hair. The exhibition touched on hair because obviously combs can be a tool for styling hair and decorating hair and so on. But I thought we really need a book much more just about the hair itself. And at the time, there were also incidents of people being expelled from school because of wearing their natural hair, and it's still going on now. What, this is how many years? 12 years later. And I just thought, yeah, let me do that. So that's where I got the idea for it. And because I'd already done a book, Secrets of the Africom, and had this information, I thought, right, the book is going to be like this. So I just started to do it. But as I started researching and going deeper, I realized there was so much more to it than I had originally even envisioned when I said to the publisher, yeah, I'm going to do this book. So I think in terms of research, that one was the one that, I mean, even in that book now, it's probably only got 50% of the things that I found out. I've got whole lots of other research that I was doing that I couldn't get into the book. And that I just think, wow, I'd like to make it into a documentary or do something else with it. So, in terms of research, I would say that one is probably my favorite one to
Mm.
research.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine it's such an interesting and different topic. And as you said, you were sparked by this exhibition and you wanted more on hair and more focus on something particular, which is like what you were saying at the start in regards to, the way we interpret things, it always creates more and more ideas. And I wondered, I guess, kind of as we close up this episode, what are you working on now as moving forward? And what are your kind of ideas? Have you got any ideas that have spilled over from past projects that you're kind of using
Mm.
now?
Well, I have the 5 book deal with Scholastic. So
Brilliant.
the first book was the reprint of The Story of the Windrush.
Brilliant.
And then the second book was The Story of Afro Hair, which was
Nice.
the one that I'd wanted to write for 10 years at the time. And the last book, which came out last year, or was it last year or year before? The last book that came out was The Story of Britain's Black Airmen,
Right.
which again, when we're talking about ideas, that kind of grew out of the Windrush because obviously many of the men who came on the Windrush had served in Britain during the Second World War,
Of
and most
course.
of them
Yeah.
served in the RAF. So the airman link was a natural one. And I've just finished the book 4, and so that'll be coming out in a few months. And that one is the story of Britain's black nurses. And that was another one where the idea sounds great, but once you start researching, you realize there's so many areas where there are gaps and other areas where there's more information. And that was an eye opener. I learned so much, with that one. So, book 5, haven't decided the topic yet. I'm open to ideas and suggestions. So, there will be a fifth one on that. And I've also just had a book out with Hachette, with their section called Hodder Education, who I actually use quite a lot in the Caribbean. And it's a little paperback book. It's an early reader, so probably for children around age 6. And there's actually a story, and it's called The Still Donkey, A Tale from Barbados. So I wrote that. The illustrator is in Jamaica, a Jamaican illustrator, and it's based on the legend from the era where I lived in Barbados, called the Steel Donkey, which is a bit like something they have in Jamaica called the Rolling Calf. And it's a story about two children who encounter this mythical beast, who a lot of people don't know about. They all hear about the Loch Ness monster, but a lot of people don't know about Caribbean legends as well. So I've written a little story about that, which is a book for children and can be read in school. So those are a couple of things that I've just been doing. And now I'm doing a bit more research and just reading generally and just putting ideas together and just thinking about some of the other things that I can write over the next couple of years. So
Brilliant. Wow,
yeah.
yeah, of course. No, it sounds like you have your hands full with that book deal. And, it is actually a really wonderful thing that you have it. Of course, a lot of these things came out of that moment in 2020. But, I think without that moment, there would be so, well, I don't even know what it might look like. Well, in terms of the provision of Black history in this country, it's such a shame that it took the murder of George Floyd in the US for these things to happen. But I guess that is the world that we are in currently. I think that is all we have time for on this episode today. And I wanted to, again, Kandace, say thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. It's, I guess, a year in the making that we got here. But really and truly, I'm so, so grateful that you could be on this episode. And, if you have children or you have not necessarily your own, but children in your life, then get to ordering these books because you need them. We need them as a society. And knowing how little the government so far have done to include more Black British history or Black history at all on the curriculum, these are the kinds of texts that we need for young children growing up and for the adults as well. They're great reads. So thank you so much, Kandace, for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me.
No, it's completely my pleasure. And thank you all for tuning in and listening to yet another episode of the History Hotline. If you haven't already bought your live show tickets, then you know what to do. The link will be in the bio, as well as information on Kandace and her books, where to find her, where to buy them, and any more information you might need. Have a wonderful week. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.